everyone, welcome back to my kitchen. So it is 4th of July weekend and my oldest daughter's birthday is on the 4th of July. And so in my family growing up, we always had this tradition of if it's your birthday, you get to pick your birthday dinner. And it could be either going out to a restaurant or it could be, having our mom make, our favorite dish that she usually cooks. So I've continued that in our family, and my daughter chose to have biscuits and gravy. She really likes my homemade biscuits and gravy, so we're gonna have that for dinner tonight. And so I'm just gonna show you guys how I make my biscuits and gravy. So it's really simple. For the biscuits, all you're gonna need is some flour, some sugar, some milk and some buttermilk, and then salt, butter, and baking powder. So I'm going to start by adding 2 cups roughly. I don't measure it super precise, but it's about 2 cups of flour, and I'm just putting it into my food processor. If you have a pastry cutter, you can absolutely just put all this in a bowl and then cut your butter in later, but I use my food processor for it just to make it a little bit easier. And then I'm going to add in about a tablespoon of sugar. Again, it's not like super precise. It's kind of a heaping tablespoon of sugar, but about a tablespoon. And then after that, I'm going to go ahead and add in my salt. And for salt, I do about another heaping spoonful, but it's actually a teaspoon is I think what I use there. So about a heaping teaspoon of salt, and then a tablespoon of baking powder. So once I have all of my dry ingredients in, then I'll move on to my wet ingredients. I use a combination of whole milk and buttermilk for my biscuits. So I'm going to use about a half a cup, a little bit more than a half a cup of whole milk. And then I'm going to use about a quarter cup of buttermilk. Once I have those in there, I'm just going to put on my lid and I'm just going to pulse these together until they form a really sticky dough. So once it gets to about that point, I go ahead and I actually pull my butter out of the freezer. When I start this process, I put my butter in the freezer so that it's really, really cold for when I get to this point. So about 10 minutes before I'm going to use the butter is when I will put it in the freezer. And then I'm just adding a shredder attachment onto the food processor, and I use a stick of butter or half a cup. And I'm just going to turn on my food processor and stick the whole stick of butter in there, and it's just going to shred it as it goes into the batter, so I don't have to worry about cutting it in or anything like that. So you can see it kind of mixing in there a little bit. And then I always have like a little pat of butter that just never makes it down to the blade. So I just keep that and I work it in by hand as I work out dough. So now I am just going to flour my surface with some flour, and then I'm going to grab my dough, and I don't want to overwork it because then that defeats the whole purpose of having the really cold butter. So I'm just going to put it on here and work it out a little bit, folding it over onto itself and adding some flour until it's no longer sticky. I like to fold my dough over onto itself because it just helps to create those flaky layers with that cold butter. So just keep adding flour until your dough is not sticky anymore. And then once you get it to the right texture, I flatten it out by hand. I don't recommend using rolling pin because you're just going to smash all that butter bits that are in there. So I just press it out by hand, and then I just use my biscuit cutter. And I usually get between 6 and 7 biscuits depending on how thick I make them with this recipe. Then I'm just going to line my baking sheet with foil, spray it with some olive oil spray, and place my biscuits on there. Then for the sausage gravy, the ingredients you're going to need for that are salt and pepper, some flour, some ground sausage, and milk, and then I always like to use some rubbed sage in my gravy as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and put my ground sausage into my heated cast iron skillet, and I'm just going to season it with salt and pepper, and again the rubbed sage. I probably use about a teaspoon of rubbed sage, but again that's optional, and then I just cook that up until it's nice and browned and has some color on it. I don't want to just cook it until it's done. I like to get some color on it from that cast iron, so I'm gonna just season it and then cook it until it's no longer pink and has some color. While the sausage is cooking, I'm going to go ahead and get my biscuits ready to go in the oven. So some people like to use melted butter on top of their biscuits before they put them in. I just lather on a bunch of butter on top, and then I put them in the oven for about 12 minutes, and I preheat my oven to 425 degrees. So we will see those in 12 minutes. So as you can see, my sausage is done, and there's that color I was talking about. I'm going to go ahead and remove most of it. It's okay if you don't get all of it out, but I'm going to remove most of it so I can start making the gravy. I'm not going to drain my pan or anything like that. We're going to use all that flavor in there to make our gravy. So the first thing I do when making my gravy is I use typically about 1/3 of a cup of flour. So I just sprinkle a little bit in there on top of whatever sausage bits are left, and then I kind of move that around, and then I will start slowly adding in milk. I have no idea how much milk I use, but I use a whisk and I just start pouring in some milk, and I just kind of deglaze that pan that way and get all those bits up. And then once it starts getting thick, I just add in a little bit more flour. And then once that's, kind of added in there, then I'll just add in milk, and I just alternate back and forth until all of my flour is used. Like I said, I use about 1/3 of a cup. And so yeah, I'll just alternate back and forth, constantly whisking. Once I have added in all of my flour, I'll just add enough milk to get it to kind of the consistency I want it, and then we'll just let it cook and bubble up until it is nice and thick. So you want to add enough milk to make it a little bit more runny than what you would normally serve it as, so that as it kind of boils and sits in the skillet, it can thicken up a little bit more. And then I'm also going to season it with salt and pepper again as well. Once I have the gravy to the consistency I want, I go ahead and add in my sausage, and then like I said, I just let it sit and bubble up and thicken up until my biscuits are ready to come out of the oven. So this is about the consistency we like. We like it to be a little bit on the runnier side, but yet still thick. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off the heat, and I'm going to pull my biscuits out of the oven, and then we'll get this plated up for you guys.